My boss John sneered. "Get out of here. You're out of your league with that low education. There's no way someone as incompetent as you should be at such a prestigious party." I smiled and revealed I was the new president. But let me explain how I ended up watching my arrogant boss's world collapse in real time, and why his humiliation was so perfectly orchestrated that even I was impressed by the outcome. The venue was the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, where our company was hosting the new president announcement party. John had just denied me my reserved seat, claiming it was inappropriate for someone with low education to attend such a prestigious event. What he didn't know was that I had been quietly observing him for months, documenting his behavior and preparing for exactly this moment. You see, I'm George Hartwell, 41 years old, and while John assumed I was just another underqualified employee, the reality was far more complex. I had been working in what appeared to be a mid-level position, deliberately keeping a low profile while building something much bigger behind the scenes. My educational background wasn't what John assumed. My professional network was extensive, and my actual role in the company was about to shock everyone in that room. John's mistake wasn't just underestimating me, it was systematically documenting his own incompetence while trying to destroy someone he viewed as beneath him. Every insult, every assignment he dumped on me, every credit he stole, I had carefully recorded, not out of spite, but because I knew this day would come. When I arrived at the hotel that evening, I had already reviewed John's personnel file. I had cross-referenced his previous employment history and confirmed several details about his upcoming performance review that he was completely unaware of. The strategic advantage wasn't just that I was the incoming president. It was that I had spent 6 months systematically identifying every weakness in his professional armor. Let me back up and give you the full context of how we arrived at this moment. 6 months earlier, John had been hired as our department head after being headhunted from his previous company. His first day, he immediately established his authority through what he believed was intellectual superiority. He would corner junior employees and interrogate them about their educational backgrounds, then rank them in a mental hierarchy based on university prestige. "Where did you go to college?" became his favorite opening question. If someone attended what he considered a lesser institution, he would smirk condescendingly and make comments like, "What a waste coming from such a mediocre school and ending up like this. Your parents must be so disappointed." His obsession with academic credentials was pathological. He brought up his own elite university education in every conversation, telling the same stories about his college achievements from over a decade ago. He seemed incapable of evaluating actual work performance, focusing entirely on degrees and institutional prestige. When he turned his attention to me, I became his primary target. During our first interaction, he pressed me about my educational background with his usual aggressive questioning. Harvard, Yale, no, some other prestigious university? When I remained evasive, his contempt became obvious. "Cut the act. You're a vocational school graduate, aren't you?" When I still didn't answer directly, he burst out laughing. "So you're just a high school graduate. No wonder you can't say it out loud. High school graduates aren't really decent people, are they?" From that moment, he stopped using my name entirely. I became incompetent in all his interactions with me. But what John didn't understand was that my educational background was quite different from his assumptions, and his behavior was providing me with extensive documentation for future use. The harassment escalated quickly from verbal abuse to professional sabotage. John would assign me projects with impossible deadlines, claiming it was a growth opportunity for someone of my limited capabilities. These weren't just difficult assignments. They were crucial client projects that could damage our company's reputation if not completed properly. One particularly egregious example involved a major client presentation that John had barely touched despite having 2 weeks to work on it. The day before the deadline, he dumped the entire project on my desk. "You're incompetent, so having this much work should light a fire under you, right?" he said with a smirk. "Consider this training. Be grateful to a senior who's giving you a chance." The project required extensive financial analysis, market research, and strategic recommendations. Work that typically took a full team several weeks to complete properly. John knew it was impossible for one person to finish in a single day, but he didn't care about the company's reputation or client relationships. He just wanted to set me up for failure. What he didn't anticipate was that my junior colleagues, having witnessed his behavior, volunteered to help. We pulled an all-nighter and delivered a comprehensive presentation that exceeded client expectations. When John presented our work the next morning, he took full credit while the rest of us sat in the back row, with dark circles under our eyes. This pattern continued for months. John would create impossible situations, my team would rally to meet the challenges, and he would claim credit for our success while treating us with increasing contempt. But each incident was carefully documented. Times, dates, witness statements, and objective measures of his actual contribution versus his claimed responsibility. The breaking point came when John's harassment expanded beyond professional boundaries into personal territory. He had seen my daughter Rebecca at our company's annual barbecue and made what he considered a generous offer. "Hey, incompetent, you have a daughter, right? That girl who's taking a gap year after failing to get into college?" His tone was predatory in a way that made my stomach turn. "She's not bad looking. Consider yourself lucky. I'll take her as my wife. She can do household chores and cleaning, right?" The audacity was breathtaking. He was proposing marriage to my teenage daughter as if he was doing me a favor, framing it as a charitable act towards someone from an incompetent family. "Daughters of incompetent people like you don't have many suitors," he continued. "This weekend, host a dinner and introduce us. With the right approach, she might become a decent woman. If you hand over your daughter, I might even talk to my uncle about promoting you. For someone like you, promotion is an honor you've never dreamed of." That conversation changed everything. Professional harassment was one thing, but targeting my family crossed a line that activated an entirely different level of strategic response. John had no idea what he had just triggered. I immediately scheduled meetings with 3 different attorneys to discuss documentation requirements for workplace harassment cases. I consulted with our HR director, who reported to me, though John didn't know this, about policy violations and termination procedures. I also reached out to a private investigator who specialized in employment background verification. What we discovered about John's previous employment was illuminating. He hadn't been headhunted, as he claimed. He had been essentially forced to resign after a series of incidents involving workplace harassment, credit theft, and an affair with a colleague that resulted in a scandal when her husband discovered the relationship. His previous employer was overjoyed when he left and had been hoping no one would call for references. The reference who spoke most candidly summed it up perfectly. "John being described as excellent is just absurd. Frankly, we celebrated when he finally left. It's rare for someone to be spoken about in such negative terms, but he earned every bit of it. But the most valuable information came from analyzing his actual work performance at our company. John's computer activity logs showed that he spent approximately 60% of his time browsing the internet, playing games, and reading pirated comics. His contribution to major projects was consistently minimal, with most work being completed by team members he supervised. More importantly, several female employees had already filed informal complaints about inappropriate comments and unwanted advances. John's pattern was to target women he perceived as having lower education and offer to help with their work in exchange for personal attention. The complaints had been building steadily, but no one had connected them into a comprehensive case yet. This gave me everything I needed for the strategic response I was planning. The key to understanding my position was that John had no idea who he was really dealing with. While he saw me as a low-level employee with limited education, the reality was that I had been deliberately maintaining a modest profile for family reasons. Our company had been founded by my sister, Emily, and her husband, Marcus, 15 years earlier. Emily had studied business management and partnered with Marcus, who had exceptional administrative and strategic skills. The company grew rapidly under their joint leadership, expanding from a small consultancy to a major regional firm with over 200 employees. I had joined the company 5 years after its founding, but I specifically requested to work my way up through normal channels rather than accepting a leadership position based on family connections. I wanted to earn my credentials and understand the business from the ground up. This meant that only a few senior executives knew about my family relationship to the founders. My educational background was also quite different from John's assumptions. Rather than being a high school graduate, I had completed my undergraduate work locally and then spent 2 years at an international business school in London. I focused on strategic management and corporate governance. Emily and Marcus had insisted on funding this education, viewing it as an investment in the company's future leadership. When Marcus was diagnosed with a serious illness 6 months earlier, Emily and the board of directors had asked me to step into the president role. Marcus would remain as chairman, but day-to-day operations needed someone they trusted completely. Given my educational background, work experience, and intimate knowledge of company culture, I was the obvious choice. The transition had been planned carefully to minimize disruption. Only the executive team and board members knew about the leadership change until it could be announced officially. This created the perfect opportunity to observe how various employees behaved when they thought no one important was watching. John's behavior during this observation period had been particularly revealing. Not only was he incompetent and abusive, but he was actively damaging team morale and creating legal liability for the company. The decision to remove him had been made weeks before the announcement party. The event just provided the perfect stage for delivering the news. When John arranged to have my seat removed from the party, claiming it was inappropriate for someone with low education to attend, he was unknowingly sabotaging his own career in front of the entire executive team. Emily had been standing near the registration desk when the incident occurred, and several board members witnessed his behavior firsthand. The plan was simple. Let John dig his hole deeper while I maintained complete professional composure. Every insult, every act of petty sabotage, every display of arrogance was being observed by people who would soon learn exactly who he had been targeting. When I calmly accepted his dismissal and left the party, John thought he had won a significant victory. What he didn't realize was that Emily immediately called an emergency meeting with the executive team to discuss his behavior. The decision was made unanimously. John would be terminated immediately, with his actions at the party serving as the final documented incident in a pattern of misconduct. But rather than simply firing him quietly, they decided to use the announcement ceremony to deliver a more comprehensive message about company values and leadership expectations. 20 minutes after I left the party venue, I received a text from Emily. "Come back immediately. Time for the real show to begin." I returned to find John looking smugly satisfied. He had spent the intervening time bragging to other employees about how he had put the incompetent in his place and speculating about his own promotion and prospects under the new president. "With my education and background, I'm sure to be a favorite of the new leadership," he was saying to anyone who would listen. "Once I'm in good favor, certain incompetent people will be cleared out. It's about time this company focused on quality." When the announcement began, John positioned himself prominently near the front. He expected recognition or at least acknowledgement of his department's recent success, which was actually the result of my team's work. The moment of revelation was perfectly orchestrated. Emily introduced me as the new president, emphasizing my educational background, strategic vision, and deep understanding of company culture. The room buzzed with surprise as people realized the quiet, helpful colleague they had known was actually about to become their leader. John's face went through several distinct phases: confusion, disbelief, panic, and finally desperate calculation as he tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. His first instinct was denial. "This is a joke, right? Someone incompetent like George can't be the new president." Emily's response was swift and sharp. "What are you saying? He's our brother. How dare you refer to the new president with such disrespect?" The room fell completely silent as people processed this information. Not only was I the new president, but I was also family to the company founders. Every insult John had made, every act of sabotage, every display of contempt had been directed at someone with the authority to end his career instantly. John's attempted apology was pathetic and transparent. I'm sorry," he stammered, but his eyes remained defiant and calculating, rather than genuinely remorseful. I looked at him calmly and said, "No need for apologies. I have no intention of forgiving you." Then I turned to address the room about company values and professional standards. But the real reckoning came when I began detailing specific incidents of misconduct. The room listened in shocked silence as I described John's pattern of harassment, his targeting of female employees, his theft of credit for other people's work, and most damning of all, his attempt to arrange a marriage between himself and my teenage daughter. "What angers me most," I said, looking directly at John, "isn't being called incompetent or low-educated. It's your attempt to involve my daughter in your scheme. Many of you here have daughters of similar age, so you understand why this crosses every professional and personal boundary." The room's reaction was immediate and visceral. Several attendees had teenagers themselves, and the idea of a middle-aged supervisor targeting their children was universally repugnant. John's face went pale as he realized how his generous offer appeared to an objective audience. Emily took the opportunity to address John's educational obsessions directly. "George isn't a high school graduate, as you've been claiming," she said. "He completed his undergraduate work here and then attended London Business School for his master's degree. We thought international experience was important for understanding global markets." The irony was perfect. John had been harassing someone with superior educational credentials while bragging about his own academic achievements. His obsession with university prestige had blinded him to the reality that his primary target was actually better educated than he was. Marcus, despite still recovering from his illness, had insisted on attending the event specifically to address John's behavior. His anger was evident as he spoke about company values and professional standards. "We will consider this matter thoroughly," he told John firmly. "Don't expect to continue working as you have been." The immediate consequences were swift and comprehensive. John was suspended pending a full investigation, with his access to company systems and facilities revoked immediately. The investigation, led by our legal team, documented months of misconduct that created significant liability for the company. But the real satisfaction came from watching John's psychological unraveling as he processed the magnitude of his miscalculation. For months, he had built his identity around being superior to the incompetent employees he supervised. Learning that his primary target was actually his boss's boss, with superior education and unlimited authority over his employment, shattered his entire worldview. The formal termination came 3 days later. It was accompanied by a comprehensive documentation package that would make it difficult for John to find comparable employment elsewhere. His pattern of harassment, credit theft, and misconduct was now part of his permanent professional record, but the consequences extended beyond simple job loss. John's behavior had created a hostile work environment that exposed the company to potential lawsuits from multiple employees. Our legal team made it clear that any future employment problems stemming from his actions would be his personal responsibility to resolve. The ripple effects continued for weeks. John's former colleagues, who had been forced to enable his behavior to protect their own jobs, finally felt safe to report additional incidents of misconduct. The full scope of his workplace abuse became clear as more people came forward with their experiences. Female employees described feeling unsafe and uncomfortable, having to develop strategies to avoid being alone with him. Junior staff talked about the impossible deadlines and stolen credit that had made their jobs miserable. Even senior colleagues admitted they had been planning to transfer departments rather than continue working under his supervision. The transformation in workplace culture was immediate and dramatic. People who had been walking on eggshells suddenly felt empowered to contribute ideas and take initiative. Projects that had been stalled due to John's incompetence and interference began moving forward rapidly. The department's productivity measurably improved within the first month after his departure. Most satisfying of all was watching John's attempts to rebuild his career fail spectacularly. His next employer quickly discovered his history of workplace harassment and terminated him during the probationary period. A pattern emerged where he would get hired based on his interview skills and educational credentials, but would be let go within months as his true character became apparent. The final confrontation came 6 months later during a chance encounter outside a restaurant. John looked terrible, disheveled, underweight, and carrying the defeated posture of someone whose life had completely collapsed. When he saw me, his immediate reaction was rage rather than shame. "It's all your fault!" he screamed, drawing stares from other pedestrians. "You ruined my life! Everything was going perfectly until you destroyed it!" The delusion was complete. Even after losing multiple jobs due to his own misconduct, John still believed he was the victim of some conspiracy rather than the architect of his own downfall. He had learned nothing from the experience and would likely continue the same patterns until they destroyed him completely. I looked at him calmly and said, "I didn't ruin your life, John. I just revealed who you really were. Everything that happened to you was the direct result of your own choices and behavior." He tried to lunge at me, but months of stress and unemployment had left him physically weak. I easily restrained him until security arrived, and he was removed from the premises with a trespassing warning. That encounter confirmed what I had suspected all along. John was fundamentally incapable of accepting responsibility for his actions. His downfall wasn't just professional, it was a complete psychological collapse brought on by the disconnect between his inflated self-image and objective reality. Today, 3 years later, I'm firmly established as company president, having overseen a period of unprecedented growth and expansion. Our workplace culture is collaborative and supportive, with clear standards for professional behavior that everyone understands and respects. My daughter Rebecca successfully gained admission to her preferred university after her gap year. She often jokes about the creepy old man who thought he could marry into our family. The incident taught her valuable lessons about recognizing manipulative behavior and trusting her instincts about people with bad intentions. Emily and Marcus are both proud of how I handled the situation. They view it as confirmation that I was ready for executive leadership. The company continues to grow under our collaborative management style, with a reputation for treating employees fairly and maintaining high professional standards. John's career never recovered. He's worked a series of temporary positions and low-level jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to rebuild his professional reputation. His pattern of workplace harassment continues, but employers are now more aware of the warning signs and quicker to address problematic behavior. The most satisfying aspect of this entire experience wasn't the revenge itself. It was the lesson it provided about the importance of treating people with respect, regardless of their apparent status. John's downfall was entirely self-inflicted, caused by his inability to recognize that competence and character matter more than academic credentials or job titles. Sometimes the best way to deal with a workplace bully is simply to document their behavior and wait for them to provide enough rope to hang themselves. John's arrogance and contempt created the perfect conditions for his own destruction. I just had to be patient enough to let it happen naturally,